Everyone, welcome. Good morning. I'm really glad to be here. I've been in technology for some time. My first start in technology, we were doing these crazy things called banner ads. You might have seen one or two in your career. But when I step back and I look at this, I see some of the patterns developing. The Internet of Things, to me, is like the Internet 15, 20 years ago, right? We're just on the beginning of this rise, and it's going to change the way we do everything in our daily lives. So everyone in here, I'm guessing, probably has a smartphone, and you probably look at that 3 or 4 times a day at a minimum. It's how you communicate, it's how you talk. The Internet of Things, in my opinion, is going to be just like that. And it's also just beginning. So if any of you were around during the 90s, you remember it was a peak and everyone was happy and gold was raining from the sky. And then it was like a valve turned off. And I remember my friend saying, give up on this internet thing, go back to work at the bank, this thing is dead, it's going to be fun. Even someone told me, oh, it's just a niche toy. And then here we are today, right? So I just kept on doing. So remember, if we ever get in these cold, dark days, whether it's your company or the industry or whatever, just keep doing what you're doing because you know it's the right thing to do. With that, I'll kick it off. So Internet of Things, I always look at this and then I use my wife as a litmus test on things. So I ask her, what does Internet of Things mean to you? And she'll say, what things? So I think it's important too that we start to define. It's almost like cloud. So SoftLayer is an infrastructure as a service cloud hosting provider. So cloud means a lot of different things to a lot of different people. Same thing with Internet of Things. So when I talk about the enterprise, we're talking about these things. So power, healthcare, rail, oil and gas, or broadly energy. So those are what I call enterprise, or another way to look at it, what GE calls is the heavy metal. So, SoftLayer itself, an IBM company now, we run heavy metal, so we're the infrastructure behind the internet. So when I see a lot of opportunity, it's in these. And it's not just the monetary, right? So they did an estimate, if you save 1% across all of these industries, over 15 years, you're talking about over 300 billion in savings. But I also look at it another way, right? So my grandmother's 93 years old. If she needs to have an MRI scan and the MRI machine doesn't work, that puts her life in jeopardy. But there's things like predictive maintenance, so you can make sure that these machines are running all the time, the machine-to-machine internet technology. The other thing on power, a lot of people say, oh, we can conserve power, but the other way to look at it is how do you optimize power? So imagine if electricity was cheap and abundant as opposed to rare and expensive. So how would you live your life differently? So would you turn the heat up to 35 degrees in your apartment? Would you turn all the lights on and have different lights? So just thinking things differently in the Internet of Technologies. But I think this is where the industrial and the enterprise internet is going, empowered by Internet of Things. All the devices and the connectivity underneath this are going to make it happen. So, this is the founder of IBM, and they've continued to evolve. They were making punch-in clocks in the States, so they've evolved over hundreds of years or 100 years. So we're always saying, okay, look at the past to know the future. So from my perspective, Internet of Things to me looks a lot like the mobile market did. So these are some Nokia phones, which now are no longer around, but there's some progression in here. There were smartphones. I remember we were doing apps, and you said, okay, wow, there's a Symbian operating system. Every phone had a different operating system. There were no standards. So getting things launched, which we actually did, I worked for Kodak. We built this really cool photo app where you could share your apps on the internet. You guys might use one of those now today. We worked with Nokia to get this thing live, but the platforms weren't there, right? So in the end, Kodak killed this thing, and then sure enough, 3 months later, out came the iPhone, right? And then we tried to revive it. But if you look at what Apple did here, they set up a platform. So now you have Android, you have iOS, so there's the platform underneath. And then the other thing they did was built an ecosystem. So like MP3 players, like smartphones, you had to get all the bits and pieces and put them together yourself. So I go back to my wife and I say, okay, is she going to do all those things? No way. But if she now has an iPhone and she can access everything from an app store to the operating system, they built a whole ecosystem around it. So I know, it's still early days, so that's a lot of work, right? And you can't do all that stuff on your own. So, you have to look at the different environments, much like the smartphone. You have the OS, you have the ecosystem, you have the app store, you have the partnerships so you can get distribution. So start looking at this stuff holistically and saying, okay, which pieces are missing? Or you'll get into a scenario where we had the right idea, but everything was so disparate, we didn't have the whole ecosystem. So you had to get bits and pieces and put them all together and it just didn't get in the flow. So when you're thinking about these, think about it holistically. Think about either the consumer on the other side or the machine on the other side, and how these things are all working together. Because I don't think the Internet of Things will take off until you start getting these standards, until you start getting these ecosystems built together, like Apple is the master at doing. So there's some things out there, right? So one of the key things we see is developing these protocols. And then I don't know if anyone's aware of the Internet of Things Industrial Internet Consortium. So there's actually large companies that are building a consortium to try to set these protocols. They're trying to build standards in there so that you can have one standard to write to, so you can focus on whatever application or whatever product or device you're working on that you add value, and not have to worry about building protocols or understanding what are the leading protocols and plugging into those. So it's a very valuable tool, and if you're looking at the industrial internet, there's a whole consortium with people like IBM in there, like General Electric. So they're building these protocols so you can connect into the heavy metal, I call it. The other one is infrastructure. So, the one thing I like about the internet, and we have a lot of gaming customers on our platform, and it used to, in the gaming market, it used to be there was Electronic Arts, and they owned gaming. So if you didn't go through one of the big publishers, your game would never be big, right? But now what happens is we have a small gaming company. It's 10 guys in Poland, and they have a global game. So the game has changed. So when you're thinking about stuff, you can now think globally, because the internet out there, SoftLayer, other cloud providers, that infrastructure is already there. So you don't have to worry about, okay, I have customers in Japan, and I need to build an infrastructure there and get a partner there. You can just plug in and get these things up and running. And the infrastructure is going to be very important because, again, you want to focus on what you're good at, what you do well, get those things running, and let someone else handle the other pieces. This is also a different approach. If you look at the economics and how markets are shifting, anyone in here wear jeans? All right. So I'm originally from California. I've been in the Netherlands about 10 years. But in California, we have a joke, right? That in California, around the turn of the century, people came from all over the world to mine gold, right? And it's still a little bit like that in Silicon Valley, where people come from all over the world. They want to be, they want to create gold. They want to get wealthy. But if you look at what was standing there and you look at the history of San Francisco, and I have a very long book on that, there's only one miner who actually was rich from gold, and it was actually silver. But if you look at the companies that survived and were big, it's Levi's. And what did they do? They were the providers of jeans for the miners. So thinking about that when you're developing platforms, maybe it's not just about your end product, but it's about the platform underneath. That's another play in this market that's going to be very important. And and in the gaming industry, it's the same thing. It's the platform providers often that do well because the titles go up and down very rapidly. The other part that's interesting here is the API economy and the sharing economy. So if you look at something like a Facebook, right, they don't actually, or an Airbnb, these companies, they don't actually create content, or they don't actually own assets. All they're doing is providing a platform for people to sell their assets. Or, Facebook, I think, is one of the most interesting things because they become a content provider without actually creating any content, right? They don't, you curate the content, you create the content, you give links, you link content into their platform. So they've created a company worth $220 billion without actually creating any content. And same thing with Airbnb. They don't own any of these assets. So it's another way to look at how business is moving, where the platform providers are actually doing better, and they're actually leveraging content and assets that are in the market now, which is the fundamental thing about the sharing economy. So they're taking assets that are sitting there and monetizing those and making those active by building the platforms on top. So that's not just an Internet of Things, but it's a whole shift in how the economy is working, enabled by digital. It's a new world now. This is one of my favorites. I went to the Think School of Creative Leadership in Amsterdam, and we did the Internet of Energy. And that's what I mentioned before. We did a reframe on this and said, okay, forget about saving costs on energy, but let's think about abundance, right? Let's think about how can we create more energy and get more energy in there. And so we could have this room with a hot tub in the back, and it could be 35 degrees, and all the lights blinking with sound, and it wouldn't cost us anything. So thinking about that. And the other interesting thing is we've seen with the deployment of energy, so now the costs in places like California and parts of Europe, the cost for self-produced energy, solar energy, is actually lower than the big power providers. So they're really struggling with this now. So the shift, there's been a big tectonic shift where now solar was too expensive, and now that shift has actually recently in the latest few months changed where you can produce your own energy cheaper than the power providers. And then the other thing they're studying, it's the Moore's law. So you look at compute power, and if I said, okay, the compute power I have in my phone now, if I told you that 10 years ago, and I know we talked about this 10 years ago, if I said, oh, I'll have this much compute power on my phone in 10 years, you'd say, oh, you're crazy. That's like a computer. And the same thing with solar, right? So the power they have now, 10 years from now, can be 100, 1,000, maybe 2,000 times more effective. So we're getting into a new era of energy creation, which I think is fascinating. But of course, that's got to run on a smart grid, right? So you're moving from a centralized production to a distributed production environment. So the platforms, the intelligence, the smart grids underneath are going to power all of those things. But I'm looking forward to having my apartment at about 30 degrees every day. The other one, this is fascinating as well. So the supermarkets. So Tesco's is a good example. So they put a simple sensor in the refrigerators, and they found out that the refrigerators across all their stores were inconsistent. Some were, the refrigerators were too low, so it means they're wasting energy, keeping them too cool. Some they were too high, which means there was food wastage. So they found a ton of waste in their system. So by installing sensors in all the refrigerators and then centralizing and managing and monitoring that, they cut their energy costs by millions, literally in a couple of months. So these are the kind of examples where relatively simple things can actually save companies a lot of money and a lot of power. And then this is the smarter stores. I think this is one of the most fascinating things as well, is where are we in the Internet of Things, and then how are you going to treat this? So now we have all this data about all these people. So how do you treat that data, right? I mean, I think think of it as the corner store. So it'd be fantastic if I went in there and they said, hey, Mr. Wisler, it's nice to see you. Here's your latte with the right amount of milk, no chocolate on top of it. I don't know why people put chocolate in coffee, but that's a different story. And they knew me, they knew when I was coming, they had it ready for me, maybe even give me a discount because I come there every day. That's great, but if I feel like they're peering in my windows at night, or like, oh, you're a little tired, here's a coffee, I would be freaked out. So I think this is one of those things where you can have a smart store and it'll be fantastic, and if you can make my shopping experience easier, smoother, fantastic, because I hate shopping. But don't look in my windows at night, because then I will not, I want to give you permission. Just don't take that from me and expect it from me, please. The other one is inventory management, and I'm running short on time because I talk too much. But this is also fascinating, because if you look at a lot of waste in the system and a lot of packaging, like there's so much waste. People say we're scarce on resources, but I don't know if any of you went to Napoli during the trash crisis. There's still so much waste and packaging in the system. So they say that resources are scarce, but then they can't even get rid of all the garbage. So things like inventory management, tracking and planning, if we can reduce waste in the system, not only will it save money, but it'll simplify our whole economic system. You can see why I'm excited about how all this stuff will work. So where are we today? This is the part where I'm going to just throw this out to the audience, right? I don't know where this is going to look, but if I say, okay, what's going on and where do I see opportunity that I can't yet define? And this is why you guys are the bigger brains, like just something to think about. Data. This is, if you look at the underlying thing about the Internet of Things, there's just going to be so much data. It's massive. It's incredible. It's mind-numbing, in fact. So how is that useful? Then I look at one of our customers and what they're doing. So this is Struck. They're based here in London. They're an advertising technology company. So what they can do is get a profile on you. They'll match you against a brand. They'll match you against a cost. And this is all on the web. And they can say, okay, this is what you'll like. And it's not A/B testing. It's more like A to Z testing. So they can do a bunch of different scenarios against your profile, against a brand, serve up the content, give you something that's relevant. So what they're calling the audience era is over. So no more broadcast, everybody's the same. It's more of here's something unique for you. And this is just advertising on the internet. But how do we take that into the Internet of Things? You know about people, you know where they are, what they like, who they communicate with. How do you take that to make their life better? Oh, and then by the way, it's going to get fast. You look at online trading, you look at the financial markets, you look at bidding for advertising. So we're talking in fractions of milliseconds. So again, all these things are going to be interesting, but once they start getting up to speed and more people are doing them, then it's going to be a function of milliseconds. And we've seen that across different industries. Excellent. And with that, I think I'm right on time. Any questions?
Jonathan, thank you very much. I was at a talk about 3 or 4 weeks ago with a guy called Kevin Ashton, who coined the phrase the Internet of Things. Fascinating guy, maybe still works out of MIT. And he made a few reflections that I reflected on in there, where you showed that whole page of Nokia mobile phones,
right,
for example. And you made a comparison between where we were maybe with mobile in the 90s, early 2000s.
Early 2000s, yes.
With where we are with the Internet of Things now. And I think one of the observations that Kevin made is where we are with the Internet of Things. Really exciting, but we're still at the point where Jobs and Wozniak were in their garage in 1978 with the Apple I, lashing it together with bits of tape.
Exactly, that's exactly right. But it's not the Apple ecosystem today.
No.
Some people are calling it the Big Bang, so the universe in IoT has just exploded, so there's millions of things out there, but it hasn't come back together yet.
Yeah.
And I saw the same in mobile. And I still have some of those Nokia phones if someone wants them.
Yeah.